There is no retirement. That is the first thing you need to understand. In most criminal organizations there are ways out: witness protection, cooperation, age, infirmity. In the Russian Bratva, the rules are different. You join for life. The organization decides when that life ends. And the men at every level of the structure, from the lowest street soldier to the man who controls cities, live inside that reality every day. This is what that life actually looks like, at every rank. In the organization that emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union and became one of the most powerful criminal networks in the world. First, the Boyik. The bull. You are at the bottom, not yet fully in, but close enough that getting out is already complicated. The Boyik is the muscle, the enforcer. The man who collects debts, intimidates competitors, and does the physical work that the organization requires but does not want to be associated with directly. You were recruited in your 20s. Maybe younger. From a poor neighborhood in Moscow, or St. Petersburg, or one of the provincial cities where the Soviet collapse left an entire generation without the factory jobs their parents had. The 1990s in Russia were a specific kind of chaos. The Soviet system that had organized every aspect of life, employment, housing, food distribution, social structure, collapsed within years. What filled the vacuum was not immediately the state. It was men like the ones who recruited you. The Boyik earns. Not well, not safely. He takes orders from men who take orders from other men. He absorbs the risk at the bottom of the organization while the men at the top absorb the money. He is, in the language of the organization, expendable. He knows this. He stays anyway, because the alternative, returning to the poverty and the hopelessness that the organization rescued him from, is worse. At least here there is money. There is respect of a kind. There is belonging. It is not safe belonging. But it is the only kind he has been offered. Second, the boyevik, the fighter. You have proven yourself, not morally. That category does not apply here. You have proven your willingness to do what was asked, to not talk, to show up when required and disappear when required and accept without complaint the consequences of the work. The boyevik is a full member, not a prospect, not a peripheral associate. A full member of the Bratva carries specific obligations. The organization is not simply a business arrangement. It is, in the specific cultural framework of Russian organized crime, something closer to a brotherhood. The tattoos, the elaborate prison tattoos that mark status and history in Russian criminal culture, tell the story of where a man has been and what he has done. Every symbol carries specific meaning. The stars on the shoulders indicating rank, the cathedral spires indicating years served in prison, a detailed vocabulary in ink that other members can read at a glance. The boyevik participates in the kassa, the communal fund. A percentage of earnings goes into the collective pool. This funds operations. It funds the legal expenses of members who are arrested. It funds the families of members who are killed. It is, in its own way, insurance, in a profession where the actuarial tables are deeply unfavorable. Third, the torpedo. The word means what it appears to mean. A torpedo is a man sent to do a specific thing, typically one specific thing: kill someone. The torpedo is not a permanent rank in the way that boyevik is. It is a role, an assignment. Men are given torpedo assignments when the organization has determined that someone needs to die and that the execution of that determination needs to be separated from the leadership. The torpedo accepts the assignment, carries it out, takes the legal risk. If caught, he does not speak. This is not simply cultural expectation. It is enforced by the same organization that gave him the assignment. Speaking means the organization will reach into whatever prison holds him. The torpedo who does his work and does not speak is remembered. His family is provided for. His reputation within the organization grows. The torpedo who talks does not survive long enough for reputation to matter. The choice is presented as a choice. It is not experienced as one. Fourth, the brigadier. Now there is authority, not just the authority to intimidate, the authority to organize, to command a brigade, a unit of the organization responsible for a specific territory or a specific type of criminal activity. The brigadier manages people, manages operations, manages the relationship between his brigade and the VOR above him. The management is not administrative in any corporate sense. It is interpersonal, political. The brigadier must produce results for the men above him while maintaining the loyalty of the men below him. The men below him are violent, volatile, and operating in conditions of constant stress. The men above him are demanding, suspicious, and not inclined toward patience with underperformance. The brigadier lives in the middle of this, every day. The income at this level is real money, enough to own things. to live differently from the Boyik who is still absorbing the physical risk at the bottom. But the obligations multiply with the income. A brigadier who lives visibly well must also maintain his brigade's loyalty, must handle the personal problems of his men, must represent his unit credibly to the war above him. The money is real, so is the exposure. The brigadier is senior enough to attract attention from law enforcement and from rival organizations. Senior enough that if something goes wrong, he is a meaningful target. Junior enough that the protection of the leadership above him is not unconditional. Fifth, the vor, the thief. More precisely, vor v zakone, thief in law. This is not simply a rank in a criminal organization. It is a specific status in Russian criminal culture with a history that predates the Soviet Union. The vor v zakone emerged in the Soviet prison system. The Gulag as a code-bearing class of professional criminals who refused to cooperate with the Soviet state in any form, would not work for the state, would not serve in the military, would not provide information to authorities. In return for this absolute refusal to engage with legitimate society, they received the recognition and protection of the criminal world. The code, thieves' code, governed behavior, sexual conduct, business relationships, the treatment of other criminals, the absolute prohibition on cooperation with police. In the post-Soviet period, the vor v zakone transitioned from the prison system into the leadership of criminal organizations. Their cultural authority, the specific prestige of the thieves' code, the tattoos, the history, gave them standing in the new criminal landscape of the 1990s. Not all vori maintained the old code. The post-Soviet Bratva was more commercially oriented, more willing to engage with legitimate business, more connected to political structures than the traditional thieves' code permitted. But the vor remained the pinnacle of the internal hierarchy. The vor holds meetings, skodki, where decisions are made collectively by senior members. The tradition of collective decision-making is old. The enforcement of those decisions is handled by the structure below. The vor does not collect debts himself. He does not carry out violence himself, he decides. The distance between the decision and its execution is the protection, and the distance is carefully maintained. The Pakhan, the father. At the top of a Bratva organization sits the Pakhan, the boss, the man who controls the organization and from whom all authority flows. The Pakhan is not typically visible. His name may not be publicly known. His face may not be photographed. His connection to the criminal activity conducted by his organization is maintained at sufficient distance that prosecution is extraordinarily difficult. He lives well. He lives carefully. The Pakhan at this level has moved into a space that the men at the bottom of the organization would not recognize as the same world. He may own legitimate businesses, may have connections to politicians and government officials, may be known in certain circles as a successful businessman whose specific business interests are not examined too closely. The Russian state's relationship with the Bratva has not been one of clean separation. Particularly in the 1990s and early 2000s, the boundaries between organized crime, legitimate business, and government were, in many documented cases, not boundaries at all. The Pakhan navigates this landscape. He has survived long enough and risen high enough that the threat to his life comes not from the street level, but from other Pakhani who want what he has, from government officials whose protection has limits, and from the slow work of law enforcement in countries that have jurisdiction over his activities. His life is not safe. It is better protected than anyone below him, and still not safe, because there is no retirement. That is where we started, and it remains true at every level, including the top. There is no retirement. The men who have risen through the Bratva, from Boyik to boyevik to Torpedo to Brigadier to vor, have accumulated what the organization offers: money, power, the specific, dangerous belonging of a brotherhood that enforces its own rules. And they have given in exchange what the organization requires: their labor, their silence, their willingness to do what was asked and not ask what was asked of them in return. Some leave Russia. The Bratva has spread into Western Europe, into the United States, into Israel, into wherever Russians in sufficient numbers have settled, and the organization has followed. The geographic distance does not dissolve the obligation. The organization has long arms and long memory. Some are arrested. The United States Department of Justice and European law enforcement agencies have prosecuted Bratva figures with increasing effectiveness since the 2000s. Prison is not the end of the organization's claims on a member. The CASA still pays for legal defense. The obligation to silence remains. And some die in the violence that the organization conducts, and that is conducted against it. in the specific way that men die when they have accumulated enemies in proportion to their ambitions. Every rank, from the bottom to the top, lives inside the same basic truth. You joined an organization that does not release you, and every day you remain inside it, the cost of leaving, and the impossibility of leaving, becomes more clearly understood, not as a betrayal of the organization, as a feature of it, built in from the beginning, by men who understood that the only way to maintain absolute loyalty is to make the alternative to loyalty more dangerous than loyalty itself. It works. It has worked for decades, and the men inside it, at every rank, in every city, in every country where the organization operates, live inside that calculation. Every single day. If understanding how power actually organizes itself, in the structures least visible to ordinary life, matters to you, subscribe. No glorification. No moral conclusion. Just the documented reality, explained as clearly as the evidence allows. Hit subscribe. There is one more dimension that separates the Russian Bratva from most other criminal organizations the world has studied. The specific relationship between the Bratva and the Russian state. In most countries, organized crime and government exist in a state of mutual opposition. Law enforcement pursues criminal organizations. Criminal organizations avoid, corrupt, or evade law enforcement. In Russia, particularly in the period from 1991 to roughly 2010, the relationship was more complicated. The collapse of the Soviet state created a vacuum in which criminal organizations, privatizing oligarchs, intelligence services, and government officials competed for control of the same resources. The factories, the natural resources, the financial institutions that were being transferred from state to private ownership at extraordinary speed. The men who won that competition were not always distinguishable from each other. Former KGB officers became businessmen. Businessmen used criminal organizations for enforcement. Criminal organizations used government connections for protection. Government officials accepted money from all of them. The word that Russian analysts used for this fusion, krisha, meaning roof, described the protection that political or official connections could provide to criminal enterprises. Every serious criminal organization needed a roof, a sponsor inside the legitimate power structure, and the men inside the legitimate power structure had reasons to provide it. This is not a historical curiosity. It has operational consequences that extend into the present. Russian organized crime figures with connections to intelligence services have been involved in activities that governments classify not as organized crime, but as geopolitical operations. Money laundering at the scale of the Bratva is not simply theft. It is the movement of capital that funds political influence, that purchases assets in Western countries, that creates leverage. The man who joined as a Boyik in 1993 could not have foreseen that the organization he entered would grow into something with connections to state power. The man at the top today operates at the intersection of criminal enterprise and state interest in ways that make the question of where organized crime ends and foreign policy begins genuinely difficult to answer. This is what the Bratva became. Not simply a gang. Not simply a mafia in the traditional sense. A structure that filled the space the Soviet state vacated, and that filled it so completely, in so many domains, that disentangling it from the legitimate structures around it has proven to be one of the most challenging tasks in international law enforcement. The ranks described above are real, the hierarchy is real, the violence is real, and the men at the very top operate in a world that the Boyik on the street could not imagine. Because it is not the same world, it only wears the same name.